And we are at Matthew 23. And this is a really good one. Well, they all are.
Weird one?
A really good one. It's
Oh,
really,
a good one.
he's lighting up those scribes and Pharisees again, and it's enjoyable to watch. All right. Verse 1. Then Jesus spoke to the multitudes and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. And I'm going to stop right there. So it's important to note here that they really thought highly of themselves, and they put themselves way up above everybody else. And they would tell people what to do that was correct in following the law. And what Jesus was saying was, go ahead and do those things that they're telling you to do, but don't do as they're doing. So don't follow the way that they are living their lives, because they are not living their lives correctly. So that's a key teaching there.
That sounds like what's going on right now, huh?
Pretty much.
Yeah. Do as we say, not as we do.
Right? Yeah, and that's a good for parents to hear that too. I mean, because we've all been kids, and we all know what it's like when you have a parent who tells you one thing but does another thing. So that really helps our kids, get raised up with their heads on straight, right?
Right.
Verse 4. For they bind heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. So they put all this extra stuff on people. You have to do this and this and this if you want to go to heaven. But they themselves didn't have to do any of those things. So it was, again, one of those do as I say, not as I do. So they weren't being a good example, but they sure didn't have a problem like heaping a bunch of stuff on people, like just a bunch of ridiculous things that they expected people to do. Verse 5. But all their works they do to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garments. Okay, so in those times, they had these robes, and on the bottom of their robes, they'd have a blue around the bottom of it. And that was to remind them, of the heavenly things. But they would make them huge blue, like they were so obviously obnoxiously to be seen, because that's all they cared about. They just wanted people to see them and oh, there's a holy man coming. I can see him from 100 yards, They really made it obnoxious in the way that they presented themselves. Verse 6. They love the best places at feasts, the best seats in the synagogues, greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But you do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Christ, and you are all brethren. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, he who is in heaven. And do not be called teachers, for one is your teacher, the Christ. But he who is greatest among you shall be your servant, and whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. So these guys, they really loved the titles. They really wanted to be called rabbi or teacher, or they really father. They wanted to be exalted above everybody else. And Jesus is like, no, don't buy into that. Don't call them that, and don't yourself be called that. As apostles, don't you allow people to call you father or exalt you. And he's saying, I'm the Christ. I'm the one who is greatest among you, and I will be your servant. He's showing them the example of what he wants them to do. And he's saying, whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. So that's a huge key. It's like coming to the Lord, on our knees. humble and knowing that we are all wretches, that we're all sinners, that, you know, we don't
You mean
deserve.
I can't get you guys to start calling me most righteous reverend?
Well, you wear a
Come
big old
on, man.
line around the bottom of your robe.
I don't. When you start wearing the robe with the robe, you talk
Yeah.
some of it.
Maybe Tom.
Yeah. For about a week till we can find a new guy.
Yeah.
Sorry, Avery.
That's okay. No. Verse 13. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. Therefore, you will receive greater condemnation. Okay, so you shut up the kingdom. So like the people that they were teaching, they weren't even teaching them in order to get them into heaven. I mean, they were just teaching them to get people under their wings to say, hey, look at all these people that I've converted. And they would, a woman whose husband would die, they would go to the widow, and they would deceive her in order to get her possessions. You know, oh, you know, if you want to be good to God, you want to give all your husband's things to us, you know, and make widows into completely destitute. I mean, they were wicked, and therefore you will receive greater condemnation. That's just, yeah, not a good deal. Verse 15. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. So he's saying this a third time. He's saying, woe to you, hypocrites. And wow, I mean, he is really getting on them because they were wicked. They were doing things that were evil, and they weren't doing things for the glory of God at all, or to honor God. For you travel land and sea to win one proselyte, and when he is won, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves. So again, they're trying to convert people, but not for the glory of God, and not in order to go to heaven. They're just like trying to get those numbers. Yeah, you know what? I've converted 20 people this month, and they don't really care. You know, and if they're converting them and they're teaching them of the ways that they're doing things, like ripping off widows, well, they're going to go to hell, and so are the people that they're teaching. Verse 16. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple, it is nothing. But whoever swears by the gold of the temple, he is obliged to perform it. Fools and blind, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold? And whoever swears by the altar, it is nothing. But whoever swears by the gift that is on it, he is obliged to perform it. Fools and blind, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifies the gift? Therefore, he who swears by the altar swears by it and all things on it. He who swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits on it. So they would make these, they were really good at being deceitful. They were good at finding loopholes and ways to get around things. And I swear on such and such, in fully knowing that they had no intention of following through. Because they weren't swearing on what they considered to be what you needed to swear on in order for it to be the truth, they felt like they could get away with that. You know, it's like, you guys are being ridiculous. You're like making up all these little kid rules, like, I swearsies, you know, I called the front seat, you know.
I call swearsies. I hadn't thought that in years. They were still playing that game back when I was a little kid, Avery. Yeah, you call something swearsies, or yeah, just make stuff up.
I called basically that's what they're doing. They're making a game out of it, and they're
Yeah.
mocking God by doing it. I mean, the more that you hear about it, you can totally understand it. And boy, he's bearing down on them. He really doesn't want them to go to hell, and he's trying to like, wake up, you guys, listen to me. And they're just, their hearts are so hardened, and it's crazy because they saw him do all these miracles and they knew who he was. It just boggles my mind. Verse 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. So here we go again. He's calling them the same. For you pay the tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Okay, so these guys were so legalistic that they would even tithe of all the spices that they had. They'd give 1/10. I mean, down to the seed. And, they'd just be like so like real pious about it. Like, I give 1/10 of everything that I have, but they didn't really care about justice or mercy or faith. So they were just trying to put on a show. And I'm sure that when they tithe, they do it in front of everybody so they saw exactly what they were giving, so that people would go, wow, look at all that these people are giving. What wonderful people. But here's an interesting thing. This phrase, blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Now, I'm sure that you're all like me. You're probably visual. You're probably picturing this. It probably kind of grosses you out. The two creatures that are mentioned, the gnat, the smalling, creeping, crawling thing, and the camel, are both unclean animals. So he's suggesting that you guys are doing all this, but here you're probably eating, you're doing things that are unclean anyhow, right? But they're so like, oh, look, I'm not going to eat this gnat that's in my soup because it's unclean. But here they are like eating this entire camel because their priorities are all messed up, and they're not doing it for the sake of God or goodness or any of that. They're just doing it for show, so people can be like, oh, they're so careful, look at how cautious they are when they're eating, right? So they were. And then again, number 25, verse 25. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. So he's just hammering them again. For you cleanse the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they're full of extortion and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first cleanse the inside of the cup and dish, that the outside of them may be clean also. So he's going to tell them this in another way in a second, but so you think about it, they're like cleaning the outside of this cup, and the inside is filthy, and they still drink it because they want everybody to know how clean they are and how perfect they are by cleaning the outside. So people see that. People don't see inside here, all the filth. And that represents the Pharisees. Like, on the outside, they're all in their uniforms, and they have that big blue around the bottom of the rim of their robes. And they just look so perfect and so religious and so magnificent that people are just in awe of them. They have so much money and they tithe so much to God that they just must be these wonderful holy men. So that's their outward appearance. But inside, their hearts are evil. Inside, they're ripping off widows. They're trying to kill the Messiah. They are wicked. So he's going to tell them this in another way, the same thing. And again, he says, woe to you, verse 27, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Even so, you also outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. And this really hits home. You can just picture this beautiful tomb. On the outside, it's gorgeous alabaster, all these carvings. But we know what's inside. Inside is
Right.
rotted, it's death, it's nastiness. And that's exactly this picture that he's painting of these people. That's exactly what they are. They're beautiful on the outside. They're just, they look the part. They look extremely religious. They're wearing everything, and they're showing people that they're tithing even down to their spouses. So people are seeing this outward appearance of this wonderful religious person, but inside again they're wicked, and they're ripping people off, and they don't care about God or heaven or anything. They don't care about saving people's souls. So thinking about how he's like talking to these folks, and a lot of times we tell ourselves, oh, those scribes and those Pharisees, they're so horrible and they're so wicked, and we get self-righteous. I know that I do. When I read these, I think about them, I'm like, how dare they? But it's like, if we compare ourselves and some of the things that we do and some of the things that are in our hearts, we're like, well, you know, sometimes I can be like a tomb. I can look good on the outside, but my thoughts can be really, you know, not so kind for others, and I can be judgmental. I mean, we can be guilty of this. So we have to be cautious, because what's, you know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Anything that he's preaching to the Pharisees, he's preaching to us. And these are messages that we need to take to heart and really like do an inventory and talk to God and be like, God, do I do any of these? Is there anything I need to atone for? What do I need to repent for? And really just like listen to him and repent when we notice that we have certain thoughts or certain things that we do that they could be comparable to them. Verse 31. Therefore, you are witnesses against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up, then, and measure of your father's guilt. Serpents, brood of vipers, how can you escape the condemnation of hell? Therefore, indeed, I send you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Bechurak, whom you all murdered between the temple and the altar. Assuredly, I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. So he's telling them, you know, you guys think that you're not guilty, that your fathers were guilty when they killed the prophets of old, you know, when they persecuted all the prophets that God sent them to try to save them. They're like, we didn't do that. We wouldn't kill any of the prophets. And Jesus is like, your fathers did, and you are also doing this, because they're persecuting the Messiah himself, and they're going to persecute and kill all the apostles except for one. So I mean, they're definitely of the brood of serpents. They come from the same wickedness of non-belief. And this is the last paragraph in here, verse 37. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate, for I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And you can just hear his heart here, and he's just so sorrowful. He's calling out to the chosen people, to the Jews, and he's like, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you know, God has sent you prophets, and you've stoned the people that were sent to you. But all I want to do is gather you together, just like a hen gathers her chicks, but you're not willing. And he's like, and I can no longer be here until you're able to say and admit that he is the Messiah, and say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So that's a really that's a really heavy-handed chapter, and it's very powerful. So what are your all insights on that one, on Matthew 23?
Well, you can be all, the Lord says, you know, and just not have any love in your heart at all. And I think of that, I was asked to read that chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians out at the cemetery the other day, and that's what that's all about. You know, if you can have all this stuff going, education and all the pompous stuff you want and dress and your finery, but if you don't have love, no good, no good.
That's
Yeah,
right.
Evelyn and I were involved in a church when we first got together. It was a big church. It had been a really big church. It set 2,500 in the sanctuary, and there was a guy that came over there that built Capital Christian Center in Sacramento, and it was one of the first mega churches in the United States. It seats 5,000, and he had, in retirement, his sons had taken that over, and in retirement, he came over to Trinity, and there was a Bible college there. The Bible college is still going, but not there. It's moved downtown. Anyway, he passed away in 2000, on Valentine's Day 2012, and we were just heartbroken. He was the greatest guy. What a wonderful pastor. And he passed away, and he had been grooming his grandson to take over when he retired or moved on. He's 78 years old, and he passed away. And so the church wouldn't have it because the guy was too young. And he was just wonderful. And he had his wife was so sweet. They're just the greatest people in the world, and we were all for it. You know, Evelyn and I were, and we'd been working with him in the ministry, and we were excited. And you know, it's so terrible that the old pastor passed away, but he had his grandson groomed and ready to take over and step in. And these old guys that are like these guys today, just like them, they wouldn't have it. He wasn't nearly good enough for them. And I said, well, we're all strong Christians. We're all solid Christians. Let's help him. Caleb is the kid's name. Let's bring Caleb along. He's fine. He's ready to learn, and he's a great guy. And he's just a chip off the old block. You'll be a wonderful pastor as well. No, can't have it. So this other really great pastor comes over from another big church in town, and he came in with a plan to bring the two churches together, and boy, it was going to be great. They could use our facilities more, and they were meeting in a warehouse out in Natomas and had a lot of people, twice, 2-3 times more people, but they wanted to bring it together and eventually just form one church, utilize that facility that held 2,500 people, and it was all kind of going on. That pastor left his cell phone in the office at the church, and these guys that are like these guys we're talking about today got his cell phone and went through his text messages, and he'd said something in there. Well, let's just really try to pull this together because it'll be great for us at New Life Center when we come over to Christian Life Center, and once we mold into one. He said this facility would be far superior than the warehouse that we're in now. We could still have 2 campuses. Well, they just went off. They just went nuts. Oh, they're just trying to steal our facility. And
that was awful.
If you've ever been involved in something like that, where there's a church split, and you got guys with this attitude that you're talking about today, Avery, to see those guys in action is sickening. Evelyn and I, we didn't want any more of that. We went to a different church, and that's where I became executive pastor. But after a year of training and the school that I was going to at the time and stuff, but it was just, we were able to grow and flourish over there. But people like that aren't there. They're out there in churches, and they just make it hard, so hard. for people to to the work of the ministry to get done.
Mhm.
And you see it all the time. I got a little book called "Are There Terrorists in Your Church?" And all about that. It's a great story.
It's a great
We'll have to
little
loan it to
story.
you guys. It's a wonderful little book. Takes about an hour and a half to read,
Yeah.
if that. And it's just a wonderful story about that.
Mhm.
But boy, the evil that can get into ministry and into God's work and just destroy is unbelievable. And that Jesus had to deal with that. And
And
then it was a hardship for him.
as much as he said hypocrite, you hypocrite, you hypocrite, you hypocrites. I mean, I just noticed that, like, it was every paragraph he addressed them like formally as you hypocrites. And what is the one thing that people say that I won't go to church because it's full of what?
Mhm.
Hypocrites. They capture that. They remember that about the Bible. You know?
Well, we're all hypocrites. There's no two ways about it. But the really bad ones are the ones that try to act like they're all that on a bag of chips. Yeah. We were talking to that. I'm sorry I missed you at the food thing. I guess I was inside when you came by, Avery.
Oh.
Yeah.
I think you left already. You'd already left to go to Bill.
She had?
No, you had.
Oh, she came while I was at Bill's.
You're at Bill's,
Bill's house.
yeah.
Okay, but anyway, so